The United States just finished the U-20 camp that hasn't happened in a long time, and we finally had one, and there was good, there was bad, and there was ugly. So let's talk about it. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Filippo. Welcome to Tactical TV. Today we have a breakdown slash recap of the Revelations Cup for the United States. We'll talk about who did good, we'll recap each game. Also going to dive into what should improve in the U.S. youth system. And for that, I'm going to have the help of Pete from 11 Yanks. Go subscribe to the channel down below. And David Kerr, the head scout of the Columbus Crew Academy, so make sure to go give him a follow on Twitter as well. We'll also be talking about the U-17 camp that many were not aware of. David Kerr will give us some insight on some young American prospects to watch out for and what academies they play for. With that said, hit the like button before you start. I will not be requesting it during the video. Thank you for watching, guys. Let's play the intro and let's bring in Pete and David Kerr. All right, everyone. First, thank you very much, David Kerr and Pete, for being here once again. I put their links on the description. David, go follow him on Twitter, and Pete, 11 Yanks channel, y'all know. We did a video breaking down the roster for the U-20 Revelations Cup. And before we start, how you doing, Pete?
Good. Doing okay.
What about you, David? Oh, sorry.
I'm doing great here, man. Thanks for having me on.
Seems like it's a little chilly there, but
it's Midwest has been a little bit colder lately. It's not like Florida or California. So
true. So for the Revelations Cup, talking about, before we start this video, we're going to quickly recap the games, which the United States played 3 games. Wasn't that good. We're going to talk about 3 players that stood out. Then we're going to talk about something we want to see improve in the overall USA youth system. And then at the end, David Kerr will quickly talk about the U-17s, which me and Pete honestly didn't follow. At least I didn't. I don't think you did. Did you, Pete? Follow? No? So David will give us some insights on how the U-17s performed. They also had a camp. So for this camp, we only got 1 point in 3 games. The United States played Brazil for the first match, and we lost 4-0. The second match, we faced Colombia, and it was 1-1 with a very late goal from, well, pretty much in the last second of the game, a buzzer beater if it was in basketball terms. 1-1 USA and Colombia. The last match, we lost to Mexico 2-1, which is something we haven't been accustomed to lately. First game. Let's start the first game, Brazil and United States. And Pete, I know you watched this game with me as well. What are your first thoughts on that game? Without mentioning yet who stood out, what did you notice, good or bad? First thoughts.
I mean, we just looked so ill-prepared. Like, nobody had knew each other's names even. Like, it just seemed like exactly what you would expect from a team that had just met up 48 hours ago and probably trained once together. They just looked completely disjointed and no clear, like, responsibilities or roles or ideas of how they wanted to play. Several players were playing out of position, which surprised me. But, I mean, it looked every bit as bad as it sounded on paper.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much as bad as the score, essentially. And again, before David gives his insight as well, the United States hired a coach roughly or at least announced a coach roughly 4 to 5 days before. And they had pretty much 1 training session before facing Brazil that was preparing for almost a month. So it's all very understandable. So, David, in regards to the first game against Brazil, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the notable thing is that we wouldn't have won that game no matter what. Brazil is Brazil. You could tell just in the individual quality of those kids, they were on a different tier to the majority of our players. But the lack of preparation showed how we lost that game. It might have been a 2-3-0 close, but they had some moments of individual brilliance that would have given them the win. Whereas the game in reality was a 4-0 shellacking to us that realistically we were lucky not to lose like 6-7-0, where they held majority possession. We were completely disconnected defensively. We couldn't produce anything in the attack outside of whenever Paxton Aaronson and Kaden Clarke or Dante Seeley decided to make something happen. So it was ugly all around.
One of the very few brightness. Oh, sorry, I'm getting confused. One of the few bright moments of the game were Paxton and Kaden, which we're going to talk about them in camp later in this video. Unfortunately, the players were set to fail by the federation for the tournament overall, and playing Brazil in the very first game definitely didn't help us. Maybe if we played Colombia, we could have adjusted and played Brazil a little bit more prepared, because throughout the tournament, which we're going to talk about, we saw the team improving a little bit every game as they trained and got to know each other a little bit better. And then we went on to the second game against Colombia, which we got the lead. We got the first goal, which was a penalty kick taken by Kaden Clarke. And then Colombia got a tie, I think it was at the 94th minute, 95th minute. It was whatever it was. They scored and the game was over. So this one here, first thoughts, I'll give it to you first, David, on this game. There were improvements clearly in our team, or was it the opponent that was weaker, or both?
It was a little bit of both, but it was more improvements on our side. It was more the individual quality that we had started to stand out a little more from who really had it versus who we might see at this level be more roster filler players. You got to see Paxton Aaronson and Kaden Clarke particularly really show their stuff in this game. Our back line stayed more organized overall. There was some adjustments into it, going to a back three for the majority of the game versus the back four they played, with Justin Che being on the right back versus right center back. We also decided to change up the midfield a little bit, moving in Daniel Edelman versus Daniel Leyva.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just got to run. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, keep going.
Yeah,
sorry.
And Daniel Edelman provided a little more defensive stability versus Daniel Leyva, which helped out a lot. Although on the ball, Leyva is a little bit more polished, but Daniel Edelman's athleticism allows him to get more time and space to produce more. And then our attacking play was a little more in sync. Although this is where you can kind of see that these guys really haven't played much with each other. You ran out almost an entirely different front three from where you would have in the first game. You had different guys lining up in different spots in the midfield. It was hard to tell who was actually playing the midfield in games because it was basically Kaden Clarke, Quinn Sullivan, Brian Gutierrez free roamed most of the game. But overall, it was still a better collective from the group compared to the first game. And you also got to see from long-term prospects what kids in the group really are starting to pull away from the others at this moment.
Yeah, now, Pete, essentially what he was talking about was the Colombia game. We looked better tactically, more as a team. We went to three in the back. The players performed better. They seemed to know their roles a little better. Add that to the fact that Colombia is a weaker opponent than Brazil as well, but not weaker by any means. I mean, Colombia did pull a draw with Mexico. Yeah. You add to that, we should have even had a win, right? Colombia got a very, very late goal. We should have had a win in that game. What were your thoughts on that game that I know you also watched with us?
Yeah, no, I just think that we saw, Kaden Clarke and Paxton Aaronson on the field at the same time. Clarke playing more of a wide role, drifting in field sometimes. Aaronson playing as a dual 8 in the 4-3-3. Or it wasn't really a 4-3-3 because it was a back three, but Aaron playing more centrally. And then Justin Che, I think, helping bring some solidity to that back line.
Definitely not. Well, maybe solidarity too. Did he provide some? I'm joking.
Just like Casey Walls and Jalen Neal, bless their hearts, did not play well against Brazil. And I think going to a back three with sort of a more athletic center back there helped. Yeah. Again, not that results are the biggest thing, right? But you want performances where they're able to compete. You want to see them competing. You want to see players playing in their best positions, or at least positions where they can be effective. I thought playing him as a false 9 against Brazil was just a complete waste of his talent and not something that he's, skill set or size is able to do well. So I think that helped us, and then we saw some other good performances from certain players. I thought that Jacob Green, who came in and played left back, showed pretty well. We used him a lot as an outlet in the attack. A lot more athletic, than technical maybe, but at least effective at this level, a little more effective at this level. So that was good to see. Yeah, I mean, just overall, we looked like exactly like you said. We understood our roles better. There was a little more clarity of whose, job is what, both in the attack and in defense.
Yeah. Also, you mention Jacob Green and also Caleb Wiley, also from the Atlanta United Academy. That was 16, was someone that showed promise in his camp, which, again, we're going to talk about the players very soon. Now, the last game that the United States played, and again, we only got 1 point out of 3, and I personally blame more the U.S. Soccer Federation and how they handle the competition in general more than the players. There's only so much the players can do under a system they don't even know about. The United States lost to Mexico 2-1, but I didn't watch the whole game. I was watching glimpses of it while we were doing the post-match for Jamaica. There were a couple good things I saw. I thought Kate Cowell showed up a lot better than the first two games. He got the assist for the goal, botting the Mexican defender, bringing the ball middle, giving a good pass to Diego Luna. He had also some good runs on the ball, even showing some good dribbling ability. Diego Luna also looked better in that game. But again, I didn't watch the full game. I know Pete was also just kind of like watching glimpses of it along with me. We lost to Mexico 2-1, but 2-1 against Mexico, which were the champions of the tournament, they beat Brazil. Doesn't sound too bad, David. How did we do that game? Because I know you watched it, but we didn't really watch the whole game.
Yep. I watched most of this game. First half was a little more distracted with USA and Jamaica there, but still watched enough to get the most of the picture of the match. We saw some good redemption performances from players, particularly Kate Cowell, who in the first match just clearly looked like a pretty average U20 player. He looked more like a guy who was actually getting some results out there in MLS in this match. He was decisive. He was more dangerous. His touches were a lot cleaner too. Overall, in this game against Mexico, there's a little bit we can take out, but things to consider is that we were down almost all of our starters from what we would normally have in this group. Besides maybe Justin Che, Jalen Neal, Gabe Slonina. Like our front three, we really didn't have many guys there. We had like Dante Seeley and Malik Sonogo, I believe, come on in the second half. Brian Gutierrez was there, played well, but really like you're missing guys like Paxton Aaronson, Kaden Clarke, Moses Nyman, Zach Booth, like just pretty much all of them. Mauricio Cuevas, Jonathan Gomez, Kevin Ricardo Pepi, who is so good. We're not having him in the cycle because he's too good for it, which means we've already riped one player to the men's national team from this age group. But you did have like 10 to 15 guys gone from this group that probably would be some preferred options. But overall, with that, to still go to one against Mexico, really be pretty 50-50 with the game of play, and a lot of guys who really have no familiarity playing with each other. Again, we had to use Justin Che as a right back for most of the game. It was still overall pretty solid. What we did start to see in that game is that Marcelo Flores from Mexico is the real deal, and that Antonio Leone could come into our team and realistically be our best center back, outside of maybe Justin Che.
For this age group, you mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say that Leone was invited, as I understand, to both camps, the Mexican and the American one, and chose the Mexican one. That doesn't mean that's his long-term future committed, but the truth is Mexico has had youth camps all year long, and he's been involved with them, and the U.S. has had none, and I'm sure that played a part in his decision.
Well, Pete, also something that could play a role in his decision there is, hey, come play for us. We actually qualified to the Olympics. You can play the Olympics. That all of that is charming for a young player. Yeah. While we fail to qualify again, because USSF doesn't seem to take this seriously enough. And you see it in the results, right? We saw sparks of talents from players, but overall the results as a team, it was terrible because it looked like this whole thing was like stitched up together. Just kind of like put it together, hope Mickey Vadas that just got hired can figure it out, hope these players figure it out, but it doesn't work that way, especially when you're facing high-level national teams, which leads to the next topic of the video. And we might have some players in common, we might not. We watched similar games essentially. I wanted to talk about maybe 3 players that stood out. And it doesn't have to be stood out as if he scored or he had an amazing performance. Something that stood out for you, that you essentially observed and probably said, hey, this kid got something there that's special and could become a good player in a professional level, maybe not national team, but in a club level. So let's do like this so we give everyone an opportunity. I'm going to let Pete go first with one, Pete. Don't give all 3, otherwise we're going to run out. Go with 1, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go for the obvious, the low-hanging fruit, Kaden Clarke. Not the thing about Kaden Clarke was not only his skill and ability on the ball, his technical skill, but also his work rate. He looks ready to press at any given moment. I think that's a result of being in the Red Bull system. He's got the athleticism, he's got the speed, he's got the explosiveness. I don't think it's any surprise, though, that he's going to, Leipzig this winter. Whether or not he stays there, whether or not they send him on loan, no surprise that they want him. It's a shame we didn't get to see more of him in his best position, which in my opinion is as an attacking midfielder. But of the players out there, he was the one who impressed me the most.
Yeah, Kaden showed personality, leading the group, looked like a leader a lot of the times. Pressing was good, defensive work rate was good, on the ball looked good, had some nice moments, had a nice nutmeg on the Colombian players.
Beautiful little Panenka penalty too.
Panenka penalty kick as well. I thought he was good for a weekend, and he wasn't available for the Mexico game because New York Red Bulls played this Saturday for MLS, so he went back early. David, do you mind if I go before you with one player?
No, you're all good, man. Go for it.
All right. I'm gonna go with Paxton Aaronson. And honestly, when I say 3 players that stood out, I mean one of each from us, right? Because if we're gonna put 9 players, we're gonna have problems here because we're gonna struggle, not because the players were bad by any means. It's just that not being in a system, not training together really didn't help their case, right? Not knowing their roles. But Paxton Aaronson for me. And why is that? The kid showed. So if he has the mentality Brenden Aaronson has, his brother, I think he's going to be ahead of him. I think he'll be better than him because he's much more better on the ball already. Looks to be better with his finishing ability. And the only thing is he still looks like very much like a kid still, right? He still looks like he's growing. He's 17 and he really looks like a kid. Just like Brenden did also when he started in MLS. And I have high hopes for Paxton. I'm not going to lie. And I think Pete said it on the stream or maybe the post-match that he thinks Paxton will surpass Brenden. I agree with you on that. From what I've seen, obviously it depends on how he's going to develop. There's so many variables that come into it. And he seems like he's going to be a different position. Looks more like a central player than Brenden, right? Not really a winger.
I mean, you would think so. But then again, all the people at US Soccer don't like playing our creative players centrally. They always try to find ways to shunt them wide. So, I mean, you would hope, but who knows, you know?
Yeah, the people in US Soccer right now, it seems like you find a creative player that can play as a 10, they shove him on the side. So you're going to play as a right winger or a left winger.
Yeah.
No matter how many good wingers we have. Now, David, since we took out the 2 obvious ones, which player besides Paxton and Kaden stood out for you throughout it? And honestly, I want to give an honorable mention after as well. If Pete wants to as well, it's fine. But David, your turn.
There's going to be 2 that I think actually should be highlighted in this part. And it's not the guys who might have stood out overall as this is after these guys the next best prospect, but the guys who raised their stock the most in the group throughout this. And that was Brian Gutierrez and Caleb Wiley. Brian Gutierrez came in really as one of the guys that most of the people who tracked the pool closely didn't really expect to play much. And came in the first Brazil game as one of our few guys who actually looked competent in the attack. Started the next game, was still pretty good. Not quite as electric as the first game, but overall still one of our better players. And the third match was, again, the same thing. Still one of the better attackers that we had. Really was not expected to be as good as he was going into this match. The next one, Caleb Wiley, a little bit more of the same. Caleb is the youngest player in this group as a Q4 2004. I mean, he was born in the last 3 months and really fit right in with the group. He's not the most gifted player going forward, but he still showed that he can get most of it done, just like somebody like a Julian Araujo. But he also showed that defensively he's really solid, and athletically he's very built for the pro game. So Caleb has some truly diamond tier left back prospects ahead of him in this cycle if we can get them, or they can stay healthy. But he showed that if those guys are out and unavailable, he's the next guy up. And maybe if Jonathan Gomez, in the worst case scenario, plays for Mexico, he's probably our starter if we play Kevin Paredes on the wing. So those 2 really, they earned their spots in this group, which is what you want to see coming out of this event.
Caleb Wiley doesn't have a pro contract with Atlanta yet, right?
No, he doesn't. Reason for that being George Bellows ahead of him at the club. He's not going to get first team minutes playing there.
Yeah.
So he's been the starter for Atlanta United 2, getting quite a few Team of the Week mentions and nominations, playing in the USL level.
Yeah.
So
at 16.
And he's 16 only.
He's better than George Bello was at that level. So the second Bello is sold, Wiley is likely signed and promoted to being the new starter.
But do you not think they could sign him as a backup and give him, 5 to 8 games in his first season just to integrate him before selling Bello? Because that's a big ask, right?
They could. Maybe they should. They already signed another 2004 and Efrain Morales, the center back. But it's really like with this kid, they don't have much of a rush. They're going to sign him before he graduates high school and considers college.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they don't really need to play him unless George Bello gets hurt and they don't have any other options. So.
Okay, so we mentioned a few here. The honorable mention I was going to give was Caleb Wiley, but
yeah, me too.
because he's 16 and he held his own on that game against Brazil. He was fine.
Right.
So that kind of stood out for me. Now,
I thought also he had a good mix. He's very athletic, but he didn't rely over much on his athleticism, and that's what I like to see. He used technique to get out of danger many times.
True. Along with that, honorable mention as well to Cade Cowell for performing well against Mexico after having a rough moment against Brazil. And I think he didn't play against Colombia. He didn't come in at all against Colombia, Cade Cowell.
Yeah.
Okay, so the final 2 sections of the video, pretty much the final one that me and Pete will do the talking, and then the last one I just want to hear, and I think Pete will be interested as well, on David talking a little bit about the U-17, how they went, at least for 3 minutes or so. And then U.S. youth system. Obviously, a lot of the issues in this tournament have to do with U.S. Soccer Federation more than anything. But I think MLS's youth academies are far from perfect. I think they're far from good. That's my opinion. I think the potential they have, we can't even consider them good yet because the potential is very big. We should be aiming for having, to a bare minimum, 10 to 15 FC Dallas academies, right? Not one and being the best in the country, having 15 that are at that level, and that's the standard. And even the FC Dallas Academy can still improve to a certain extent. But with that said, before we go to David, because he'll be very good to talk about this, because David is the head scout of the Columbus Crew Academy. He'll probably have some very good insights on this. Pete, what do you want to see improve in U.S. youth development? And obviously over the long term, right? It's not going to improve like this.
No, of course. But I think before we have any discussion about, youth development, the first question has to be, what are we trying to be, right, as a country? If we are content to be good CONCACAF country and then go to a World Cup and be plucky underdogs and try to, defend our way to maybe a knockout round, go to a second round, then I think what we're doing now is mostly fine. However, if we want to be a top nation in the world, which I think most of us in the fan base and even in the, the professional environment want us to be, that is a team that can compete for World Cups, then we have a long way to go with our youth development. It's exactly what you said. Right now we have Dallas, and I would add Philly to that, even though they're a few years behind Dallas in terms of their, production rate. But they're doing the right things now that speak to them continuing. Like the talent pipeline that's coming out of Philly right now, if they continue doing what they're doing, should continue. That's 2. And then, you have the rest of the clubs who maybe have 1 or 2 guys every now and then, but they're not consistently churning out quality youth players. And what I would like to see change is we've made strides of progress in this department, but we still need to make more. It's just technical development from young ages. And you saw that against Brazil. Every Brazilian player on that field had a technical floor that was superior to almost anybody on our team. And that is the way that they think about the game. It's the way they play the game from the young age. And it starts when you're 7 years old. 7 to 12 is the golden age of technical development, because that is when your neural pathways are still being formed and motor skills are most easily entrenched into your DNA and into your natural way of doing things. Too often at 7 to 12, most MLS academies don't actually have a U8, U9, U10, U12 team that is considered their academy. It's like a farmed out team that's like, oh, they're affiliated with us, but there's very little hands-on, MLS, like best practice, right? And both of you guys work in MLS academies. I don't. So you can maybe tell me if, the specifics of this. But I think technical development continues to be a huge, huge problem. We need to have guys who are comfortable on the ball from the time they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, or it's too late. By the time they're 16, 17, 18, you can improve marginally, but not the same as you can from a young age. And so I think that still needs to be the focus.
Yeah, so I work with the Orlando City Soccer School, which is attached to the academy there, and Oscar Pareja is building it essentially. So I need to see where it's going to go with. We know he's capable of building
Yeah.
a good academy, so we're going to have to wait and see. Adding to what you said, it is true. U.S. soccer needs an identity, and it has to trickle down from the senior squad and down to the youth system. And we need to know what we are. We're going to be the technical team that controls and disorganize the opponent on the ball. Are we going to be the counter and grind it out team? What are we going to be? I want us to be good on the ball. I want us to be a team that controls possession and dominates the opponent. But before I tell you what I want to hear from David. What can we improve? And in your opinion, David, what should we improve?
Yeah, the biggest one for me is on the coaching side, and that's coaching education, because you have professional clubs around here only are going to be limited with how much they can touch and how much they can influence, because we can't just create 300 coaches to go with everybody, but we can start to educate coaches from younger ages who then can start teaching those players and implementing those foundations. Right now, going to games, things like that, it's for every one team that really plays principle-based soccer, true possession-based, actually plays with IQ, you see good players come out, you have 4 to 5 clubs that just play kickball. And you can tell that the ones who really do try to teach those foundations, teach those ideas, teach kids to play out of space, teach kids to solve those problems, they're consistently producing kids that are MLS Academy level talent and youth national team level talents. You see outside of those, it's maybe they find a kid that's fortunate enough that came to their club, but it's not as consistent. The major league clubs, kind of like what you would have said, Pete, we need to start to trickle down to the younger age groups. We need to start seeing teams potentially like U10 to U12, making sure they do with kids in their area, specifically because we have some big market teams, making sure that they're teaching these kids their ways at U10, U11, U12, and younger. So that way, by the time they are in their main technical academy age group levels, they're better players than what they would have been in other situations. And the biggest thing that they need to do is that outside of the MLS next level, there needs to be major restructuring, reorganization of these levels. You have U.S. youth soccer with their own giant umbrella. You have U.S. club soccer with a giant umbrella. You have ECNL. You have new random leagues popping up out there. And it's just diluting the level of play that these kids are at and what these kids face week in, week out, to the point that you have a couple clubs who aren't in MLS Next for some reasons, and they're just murdering teams week in. And they could play a team maybe in the other leagues that are just as good, but they only have one of them in their level. And it's really, and then that on average produces worse players to move and trickle up the system to the professional academies. And it's a really big issue right now.
How about if we had kind of like how Brazil has a Copinha, which a bunch of teams, 100 teams can register and play once a year tournament where academies from MLS, everyone's there. And that's where scouts will come and scout the players for the professional academies. Maybe what we need to improve, along with what you said, the coaches right there, which it's definitely a problem in the United States. We definitely don't have enough good coaches. And I think the scouting, right? We probably miss out on a lot of talent because of that. The kid just stays on this small club or not on the right development system, and he's never found. No one finds him, and he just stays there, and then he gets old enough and he goes past the age that Pete mentioned and gets old, and then it's too late to develop that player. So for me specifically, pretty much what you guys said would impact what I'm about to say. And I've been saying this so long. We tend in the United States to think that center backs and defensive midfielders, defensive-minded players, right, even fullbacks a lot of the times, they just have to be athletic. They have to be athletic and they have to body players and be physical, and they're going to be good defenders. The game evolved. There was a time, maybe in the 90s, where athletic defenders were enough. Nowadays, defenders that are top quality, the best teams in the world, they're ball-playing defenders. And we saw that against Brazil very clearly. That was the game that comes to mind right away. Mexico I didn't watch as much. But the Brazilian center backs were all good on the ball. The Brazilian six was good on the ball. For some reason, when we have a six that is a little bit more technical, he's not good on the ball. And then when he's more athletic, Sorry. When he's more technical, he's not athletic.
Yeah.
And when he's athletic, he's not technical. So it almost seems like teams are in development are looking at this like you're athletic, so just be more athletic, be more physical. That's all you need to do. So we're not developing these players that are kind of like Chris Richards, right? Which has all that athletic ability and technical ability on the ball. We need to start valuing that a little bit more. And how do you do that? You start by having an identity, like Pete said, and improving the coaching. That's a start, and then along with that, you trickle down to the scouting system. So essentially, that's what it is. I think we need to start evolving with the game and understanding that every single player, including the goalkeeper. Okay, we talk about Matt Turner, including the goalkeeper. Goalkeepers nowadays need a minimal technical ability. You don't have to be like Ederson from Manchester City. It doesn't have to be that level, but you do need to be able to play with your feet. And again, goalkeeper is another position that in the United States, if the guy's big, athletic, agile, can shot stop, they think that's good enough. And once upon a time, it was. It isn't now.
No. I think if we look at, other countries in the world that have a similar sort of who we could maybe imitate, I think France always comes to mind. Because like us, France has very athletic players, if you notice. They're not like Spain. Spain, of course, there's different kinds of athleticism. I don't want to say Spanish players are not athletic, but they tend to be smaller. They tend to be a little more wiry, but just really good on the ball. What France has done so well is if they have married athleticism, which we already have as a country, they've married that with technique. And that is what's going to make France, I think, for the next 10 years, a huge force in the game, competing for every trophy they're involved in. That's who we should attempt to be. Because I don't want to dismiss athleticism. I think it's very important. Yeah. But I think we have overemphasized athleticism to the detriment of technique. Mm-hmm. And not just technique. We have to also talk about game intelligence and decision-making from a young age, how we teach people, players to think about the ball, to think about the game, to think about ideas, But yeah.
I think that goes also to what David was saying about coaches. I think a lot of the coaches in the United States specifically, they overcoach. Yes. They think everything is coachable. While, like I said this so many times talking to Pareja, and that's where I noticed, Pareja knows I'm going to curse. He knows his shit. Because I asked him, how do you develop the players? And then he said, stop coaching them and let them play at that age. They're 8. Give them the ball, keep the game rolling. Obviously, sometimes stop to orientate the thing here, but you can't stop the game every 2 minutes. Let them play. They're going to develop game intelligence. They're going to develop technique. And in the U.S. specifically, because basketball and football, there's a lot of set plays and a lot of timeouts. You can stop. Soccer's not like that. You got to let the guys play. But we have this mentality that we need to stop, teach. No, let them learn on their own a little bit. You talk after, you talk early after, and let it be a little bit more. And yeah, parents will get pissed off. They'll think you're not doing your job. It's how's that doing your job? You're just letting them play. It's yes, that is part of our job. But
well, to add to that too, and when you do need to coach, when there are moments where you're trying to get a point across as a coach, instead of telling the kids what they should have done, ask them questions, right? Get them to figure out the solutions themselves. Ask the right kind of question. Hey, well, you got that pass from the goalkeeper and it got taken away from you by the striker. What do you think happened there? So you get them thinking, what do you think you could have done differently, right? And then now they're thinking about the solutions to problem, which is what you want. You want them problem solving. And sometimes if you do have to coach, it's about asking the right questions, not telling them what they should have done.
Mm-hmm. So anything you want to add to that, David?
Taking his DNC license courses.
What?
Yeah, you took your DNC licensing courses.
Yeah, but I learned that. It's a big that for sure. Mm-hmm. But I also learned that in England.
Yeah, now, it's really important to kind of hands off. That's why kids in Brazil, where they just play so often on the street, do get that technical level. I also think there needs to be an emphasis on playing physically ready kids up age groups where they're going to be more tested. Because right now, a lot of problems that we have is that teams play to win versus playing to develop. So you have a kid in a team who realistically is 1 to 2 years ahead of his age group physically, and wins games because of that. When you look at a Real Salt Lake, their U15s in the summer had a kid named Axel Kai. Axel was born December 30th, 2007, is already 6'1", 165, and is built like a man. This kid ran rampant at that level while playing up an age group. So what happens now? He continues to play up with the 17s now this season. It's really important to make sure that kids are put in situations where they will have to solve those problems. Whether you are playing a center back as a 6, a winger as a 10, winger as a striker, 10 as a striker, things like that at those levels, because you're teaching the kid how other positions work, how you're solving that, and you're also forcing kids to really improve and develop on their soccer IQ, their technique, and things like that. Because right now you see when we talked about 6s and center backs being athletes with no soccer ability, a lot of those guys were played at their own age group and didn't have to play soccer. They just physically crushed kids for an entire season, won a championship doing it. It taught them that they're the biggest, fastest, and strongest player, but didn't teach them soccer ability. Then you see that trickle up, and you see kids at the youth national team level, the college level, the high school varsity level who, yes, they're big and strong, but they lack the soccer ability. And it's because they've never needed it before. So
it's interesting because... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I think it's just, if you have a kid like that, I think it's a little bit of a disservice playing that kid among his own age group where, yes, maybe technically he's there, but they don't get served properly, killing kids physically below them.
Seems like Mexico has that problem, David, with the youngsters, right? They keep them in the youth level and they have the best 18-year-olds in the team, while the United States, for example, had Ricardo Pepi playing already at the senior squad or challenging himself in MLS. And Mexico has always the best. So Mexico goes to youth tournaments and they're fantastic. But then when they go to a World Cup, they win youth World Cups. They make it to youth World Cup finals. When it comes to an actual World Cup, they can't get past the round of 16.
And Mexico does do it a little bit at the youth, academy levels. What they do is they have their numbering structure in their teams where you have 500 numbered players in their U13s, 400 14s, 300s, 15 17s, 200 something, 100s, and it's basically the smaller number you have, the closer to your first team. They do play kids up there pretty often, and those kids do develop really technically ahead. The youth national system for them, they don't play kids up as often. You don't really see kids getting moved up until the U20 level. Where we saw Antonio Leone, who was a 2004 captain in that 2003 group. But the big thing that you notice with Mexico is that your youth national team program can be judged on who win your games, and then do you translate kids to your senior national team? The first part of it, Mexico is dominant. They kill it at the youth level usually. U17s won 2 U20 World Cups, made a final in another. U20, I believe they've made a World Cup final. U23s, they've won an Olympics. They've barely translated any of that to the senior team. Not just in results for the senior team, but actually players getting to that level. Which means that, yes, you won games, but the actual goal you failed, which is your big issue. USA, however, we've had our 2 worst U17 cycles produce the best talent for our national team. Our worst showing at a World Cup was in 2015. Christian Pulisic was in that team. Tyler Adams was in that team. Weston McKennie didn't even make the cycle. Our 98s are some of the best guys. Even Luca De La Torre was there. You look at the team that did just as bad, 2019 cycle. Gio Reyna, Gianluca Buzio, George Bello, Joe Scally. More will probably come out of that team too. So it's really, what are you doing to provide that pathway to those players? And is your developmental system in place to guide them along that, which Mexico also fails at, in the fact that they don't promote kids to the first team as early as MLS clubs do, and they don't move kids on to Europe like MLS clubs do. You can blame passport situations, things like that, but when you turn 18, Germany will take you.
Yeah,
no questions asked.
Is an excuse. It's an excuse.
Yeah,
because it's only for 16, 17-year-olds, and Mexico's keeping them till they're 23, 24. So it's not a thing.
No, there's no excuse there. But David, let's move forward to the next topic here, which is essentially you talking in the most summarized manner possible, because we're not going to know many of the players. The U17 had a camp. Can you briefly say who they play? What was the score? Tell us one player that stood out, and maybe one player that we expected more and wasn't that, whatever it is. Go ahead.
With my new phone, I don't have the actual results of the games. The U-17s played a couple U-19 MLS Next teams and just scrimmaged them. And they also, I believe, did an inter-squad scrimmage among themselves as well. They had a camp from November 3rd to November 8th. And it was a 36-player camp. And it's just really the first kind of getting the group together, IDing most positions. You had a couple of kids from Europe come in for the first time. And so this is just the very early ID session of these kids. Getting them in the system, teaching them the ways, getting the tactics ingrained. Usually the youth national teams just was a straight play a 4-3-3, make your midfield a classic 6, an 8, and a 10, hopefully win the game. Now it's a little more teaching Greg Berhalter's system and tactics, like we saw when they played with false nines with guys in the men's national team. We saw with Kaden Clarke in the U-20s. The U-17s were doing the same thing.
That worries me.
It's a little bit, but U-17s need to do that because the striker position in this age group is barren. Like, the best kid is probably Axel Kai, who we still need to take time to show that he's not an early developer, and that he can develop that soccer ability more. Outside of that, like, there's no kids in this cycle that are the clear-cut striker, which is, it might be like 3 or 4 2007s that are competing in the 2006 group. Huge concern. And the other concern for this group is also going to be not left center back, where there's like 4 good options, right center back, where there is 1 good option. And so now we have to see what's going to happen with this group. Things to note about the 17s is that the goalies, we have some really good options there. Fernando Delgado, RSL, another kid USA and Mexico are going to battle over. Has already been in Mexico camps, was their best goalie, been in USA camp, and was reportedly our best goalie. Great with his feet, great shot stopping at RSL. Apparently maybe better than David Ochoa and Jeff Dusen up there. Really high ceiling. You also have a year younger, and probably the guy who's going to be competing with him in Julian Eystone, a 6'6", athletically gifted shot-stopping goalie, who is athletic enough to play as a striker at the academy level as well. Like, those two are just going to be the guys this cycle. Like, and they're another group to rival the 2004s, who were another great goalkeeper year. The defensive group, you have a couple good kids, like the right back, Matthew Schenfeld from, sadly, FC Cincinnati. He's an insanely talented right back. Like, if there is a kid that in Ohio is probably like the best prospect in that, regardless of age group, that's him. I think that kid is talent in the next 1 to 2 years to be playing at the MLS level, and he's just a super talented attacking fullback.
For Cincinnati, maybe right now. He could play right now.
Honestly, looking through their depth chart and looking at the ability of this kid, like, it's not that unfeasible. He's just a great player. Like, the kind of gripe with him is that he's small physically. He's very fast and has a very quick change of pace, but he's like probably like 5'6", 5'7" right now. So, but you also have in the defensive group Javen Romero out of LAFC, really talented, rock solid, physically gifted left center back, potential left back depending on how tall he gets. He's around 6 foot right now, I believe. Apparently was the real defensive, just stalwart standout of this group. And left center backs, you have a couple really good options in this age group. You had a kid who went to Bayern Munich and trained from DC United, Matai Akinmobi. He's probably not going to sniff this group because of the other guys ahead of him. So it's a great group. You also have good left backs. New York City FC signed a kid that's a 2007, the day before, or like right after he turned 14. Or pretty short, close to it. His name's Christian McFarlane. He's already signed. He's a left back prospect. You also have Brian Alanis from Houston Dynamo.
He was signed with the first team?
Mm-hmm.
At 14?
First 2007 on a pro deal.
Are they going to do the Joe Scally on him, not play him?
Probably. This kid, realistically, from a performance perspective, is really far away from the first team.
Now, David, so before we wrap up the whole video here, what I wanted to get from you is one midfielder that from this group that you would say stands out, and then one forward, and it could be a winger when I mentioned forward.
The midfielder that I think is going to be a standout from this group is Jude Wellings at Real Salt Lake.
What's his name?
His name is Jude Wellings. He's at Real Salt Lake as well. There's a reason why this RSL team won the DA. They have a great 2006 class, but he's a very good center midfielder, really well-rounded, creates in the attack, links the play well, physically gets around well. Apparently he was on his game in this camp and really stood out compared to the other 8s. You also have a guy who wasn't in camp that probably will be at some point, Bento Estrella. Bento, we need him to stop growing. He's probably like 6'3". He's probably going to be the 6th for this group. Him or Matthew Corcoran from FC Dallas or Edgar Bazan from SKC, but we have some good options there. We have some really talented actual number 10s in this cycle too. One of them was played on the wing and kind of stood out among that forward group, and CJ Only from Philadelphia Union. CJ won the Golden Ball of the U-17 MLS Next tournament while playing up 2 years, and played for PDA and scored realistically like the most out of his mind goal that I saw down there when I was watching games. So he's really good. What I wonder from this 07 group right now is, does anyone have star potential, or is it going to be like the 2001s where you have a lot of very good mid to upper ceiling players that can get to Europe? But do we have any superstars? This kid is clearly above the rest talents. So far, not yet. Don't want to kill expectations, but don't want to raise them.
By superstar, you mean Pulisic, Reyna, right?
Our Pulisics, our Geos, our youth national team, clearly the best one in the field. Can get to Europe, break in pretty early, not because of physically gifted, but because of talent level. We have more guys like your Tanner Tessmans, your Cole Bassett's, this guy is probably going to do great in MLS, get to Europe, do fine. Which for youth national team probably should be good enough to get results. For the men's national team, this is a group that in 4 years from now, you're going to be trying to see those kids break in at the younger age groups for the 2026 cycle.
Yeah.
You generally need.
David, one question. I don't know if you have the answer to that. And then we're going to get close here to wrap up the video as well. I don't know if you have the answer to this. From this U-17 squad, which team has the most players? Which team do most players come from? Is it RSL? Because you mentioned RSL a few times.
San Jose and Philly put the most kids into this group. Yeah, Philly, when we talk about FC Dallas versus Philly, it's Philly by a long shot right now. As a guy in another MLS club, they're the group that sets the bar in pretty much every way now. But San Jose, I believe, by numbers put the most kids in. Then it was Philly after them. But when you look to who's going to potentially have the most real pool players in the group, it looks like Real Salt Lake is going to potentially be leading that line and competing with Philly. And for both clubs, that really is a testament to what scouting can do. Real Salt Lake had, I think, Fernando Delgado's from the area, but Axel Kai and Jude Wellings, they're both out-of-market players. For Philly, Bajin Darbo's from Wisconsin, CJ Olney's from New Jersey. You have other kids that really aren't from the actual Philadelphia area that they're pumping through and putting into that group that are doing very well.
Okay.
So and Philly also runs U9, U10 teams all the way up that are they win games 12-0 routine.
That is probably one of the difference makers, right? You start at the U9 level, while many teams start in the U15. When the players get to the U15 level, bless you.
Thank you.
They get into a whole different level. But guys, any final thoughts, David, before I go to Pete?
Yeah.
Sure.
So with the 17s, we learned a little bit of expectation settings and what to think of when the group goes through. This cycle is going to be very good in the attack when they get going, but is the spine of this group good enough to defensively hold together? Can our 6 lock down their attacking player? Can our center backs hold up their forwards and their wingers? I'm not sure. And that we can score 4 goals a game, but if we let in 5 goals, do we get the result at this level? Like, you're going to have the most talent midfield and attacking from your 8s and up, the best cycle ever, and by far. But if your center backs and your 6 cannot protect your goal, it doesn't matter. And
so it seems like we're gonna have a couple rough years with 6s and center backs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's center backs look to be getting more of them at the younger age groups. 6s as we get younger still is a concern.
All right.
And
sorry, Dave.
Yeah, the U17 level for people to kind of understand with that. If we can get a striker somehow, that team can be really good. Like, actually compete for some medal, for some hardware good. They're a really good group.
All right, Pete, now you. Any final thoughts of anything we talked about, or just wrap it up?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, like, with the whole youth development conversation, the last thing we want to be with this generation of players that we have now, the senior team, is Belgium or Chile, right? They had great golden generations, and I know people are going to jump on me for Belgium. I'm telling you right now, Belgium's best players are all in their late 20s to early 30s. They are not developing the same level of players, especially in defense, that they used to. So, I mean, maybe they'll squeak into a decent performance in Qatar, but after that, they're going to struggle. And we don't want to be that. We want to continue producing the top quality players if we want to compete, right? If we want to regularly be a France and Italy, a Germany, a Spain, and, you know, Brazil, Argentina, then we need to make sure our youth pipelines are still producing the same level of players every 2-3 years, or it's going to dry up at some point and we'll be sitting here going, oops. So I just think that's important to be asking the right questions now and not wait till it becomes a problem. Like in Cuba, some people alerted us early. They were like, hey, this missing generation. We didn't really pay attention. And then we look back and we go, oh, they were right. You know, so it's good that we're bringing up issues now and see if we can do anything to fix it before then. That's my thoughts.
And just adding to what Pete said, you can never produce too much talent, because then you can afford a few players to not live to their potential and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. That does it for the coverage of the 2021 Revelations Cup. Definitely when we have more youth camps, we're going to have David here. He's following it much closer than us to bring in the insights. Guys, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button before you guys go. Not you two. Well, you two also. Hit the like button, Pete and David. Thank you very much, everyone.